Hey guys, it's Kirilla here, your favorite neighborhood business analyst. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting technique or a way of diagramming. But first, let me remind you that we're doing this series to say thank you to our supporters on Patreon. This is called Badass BA Whiteboard Sessions. And if you're watching this video somewhere on YouTube, please go to our Patreon page and subscribe. You will find much more interesting content there. So today we're going to talk about business footprint. And the idea to talk about that was given to me by one of the listeners on the webinar we were doing the other day. And the question there was, uh, apart from business objective model, is there a way to like model business goals and sort of align them to functionality? And the answer to that is yes. Of course, there's a lot of different ways to do that. And one of those ways is business footprint diagram, which we're going to talk about today. A business footprint diagram is based on several concepts, and you can use whatever notation you want. You can use Accumate notation, you can use UML, you can use BPMN, or whatever other notation. So today we're going to just use some elements, not notation specific elements, just to explain to you what this diagram is all about and how to work with that. So what you need for business footprint diagram is several concepts that you're going to tie up together: business function, business process, business objective, business service, and application component, or in our case we will going to talk about functionality or epics if we are going to use agile terminology. And of course you will always have a business sector or a stakeholder, as we may want to call it in our case. Now, you might wonder, like, what is the difference between business function and business service? Isn't it like the same thing? Well, not really. And to explain that, I will gonna have to throw in some definitions. A function is what you organization wise have or should have in place. For example, marketing, sales, etc., which then is instantiated by one or many organization units. So for example, you have a sales function of your business. It may be represented by several departments, branches, like you may have like branch one, branch two, or different kind of departments selling different stuff. Or you may organize it whatever way the business thinks it's right to do, but it's still the same function. It's sales, right? The function is sales. Now, if we talk about services, service is what function provides internally or externally in order to achieve a business objective. So, for example, in our case, sales may have different services, like, for example, order management or invoicing. And invoicing is an external service targeted to the customers. And order management can be both like internal or external, depending on the way you look at it. So that is the difference between function and the service in our case. So now let's move on and do some modeling. So first, you should state business objectives. So in our case, you see here several business objectives. It's optimize client conversion, reduce order processing time, increase online reservation rate, and improve client follow-up. And all of these objectives are related to sales function. Now, of course, when you're working with a project, you might have identified a lot of business objectives, and some of the objectives may touch upon not just one function, but several functions. And in this case, it's better to split this objective so you would only have objective related to one function. And if you think about it, it's really easy to do, because all what you need to do is just to decompose the objective into several objectives, smaller objectives related to different functions. And now each business objective may have a certain stakeholder, so you want to also put that on the diagram. It may be just one stakeholder bringing up all these 3 or 4 objectives, but there may be different stakeholders related to different objectives, and there's a way to specify that on the business footprint diagram, and it will be easy for you to understand then who relates to what and who will be eventually like the go-to person to talk about the objective. Now, with the second step, you add services to the function, something that we already done earlier. So we say that our sales function has a certain services, invoicing and order management. And again, on this business footprint, it makes sense to specify just the services which are related to the goals, which are related to your project. You don't have to specify the whole business unless it's not the scope of your project, right? If you're working with a whole enterprise or the whole business and your task is to actually map everything, then yes, you should include every service. But for your goals, and most probably you as a business analyst will work on the project which takes into account, or which works on a scope which is kind of narrowed down to certain services that the company works with. So it makes sense to depict just the services that you're going to be touching. And yes, you may use the stakeholder or the actor figure like also related to the services. If you have identified a special like operators or managers who are related to the services, and you analyze them, identify them, you should also put that on the business footprint diagram. Then you add processes. Again, you should only put here the processes which may be related to what you're operating with. So you see how our diagram builds up. So here for the sales, we have a reservation creation and order cancellation. There might be like up to 10 processes depicted here, depending on what are you going to work with. So for example, your project will touch upon these 2 processes, and this is what you're put in here. And you here somehow build all this mapping, you build a relationship between goals, functions, services, and processes. And there you have the scope of your whole initiative. And with the last step, you just add application or modules or components. But in our case, we may treat this as epics related to our functionalities. We don't have to split it further into, let's say, user stories or something. But here you can see a very, very visual relation between your epics in your backlog or functionality or modules that you wanted to create or already created to certain business functions, services, processes, and you see how it's related to the goals. You see all the stakeholders which are related. This is a great way to pick the information, to also validate it with the key stakeholders to make sure you understand the whole picture in a correct way. And it's also a great way to onboard other like team members to this type of diagrams. And this is a really simple example. You might want to build a much more complicated diagram, but just using these components of the diagram and relationship between these components, you may want to depict the relationship between the business goals or objectives, the functions, the services, the stakeholders, the processes, and your application components or epics in your backlog. You may also want to like put something on the arrows here to make sure you give a specifics of how or what type of relationship there is, how it impacts. It maybe changes, maybe it just represents, maybe it automates the process, and you want to maybe just put that also around the arrows. So don't stop yourself. Use whatever information you want to add here. So I'm using these diagrams from time to time just to arrange application view with the business view of the whole project. It may not be suitable for every type of the project, but when you're dealing with the enterprise clients, it's really something that you may want to consider for your projects. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching and listening to this, and see you in the next episode. And don't forget to sign up to our Patreon. You will find all the links under this video.